We are LifeChurch Livonia.
All right, LifeChurch Livonia, it is so good to be here with you this morning, and my name is Brian. As I said earlier, I'm the pastor here, and I would love to meet you if you're new, and so grab me after the service so we can get to know each other. And I don't know about you, that question we asked you a little while ago, like, where's your happy place in nature? And the correct answer for me is all of the above. I just love being outside. And my family and I were at a camp all week, and I was a speaker at this camp at Portage Lake Covenant Bible Camp, and it is on a lake that's connected to Lake Michigan, and just sitting on the beach, that is a happy place, isn't it? And so it doesn't necessarily have to be the ocean. It could be Lake Michigan, because I think Lake Michigan is actually better than the ocean, right? Does anyone else agree with me? Yes, yes. And the reason I think it's better is there's two reasons. One is it's closer and cheaper to get to. Actually, three reasons. Two is it's not salty and you don't feel gross when you get out of it. And three, there's nothing in it that could eat you, right? Is anyone else with me? We live in a great state here in Michigan. I love it. And others of you are like, no, the ocean is better. It is what it is. I love it, and it puts me in a happy place. I feel restored and ready to go. And so we are today in the midst of a series called Holy Roar. And what this is really about is an opportunity to dig into the Old Testament of the Bible, the story about God's people up until Jesus. And that the Old Testament was written primarily in Hebrew. And so Hebrew as a language was the language of the ancient Israelites. And what we've been looking at over the last few weeks are some of the words in that original language of Hebrew that are translated into praise or worship. And so, in our hope, as we do that, as we look at these, as we unpack these words, is not simply that we would expand your vocabulary. This isn't just a vocabulary lesson. It's an opportunity for us to be drawn into a deeper life with God, a deeper and more full experience of what it looks like to be a worshiper. And ultimately, our desire is that instead of expanding your vocabulary, that it would expand your life. And so, the reason we ask you that question about where's your happy place in nature is because I think that every human that's ever experienced that mountaintop vista or that sunset over the ocean has experienced what it feels like to worship. Even if they didn't know that's what they were doing, they've experienced what it looks like for your heart to swell and for us to have a reflexive, like a response to something, the grandeur of all creation. That when you stand in that mountaintop vista and you look out, or you stand on that beach, or you're in that forest, and you have that moment, what's actually happening is a moment of worship is occurring. Even if you don't know that's what's happening. If you don't have language for it, it elicits a response, a reflective, reflexive response to the grandeur of creation. And Paul, in the book of Romans, helps us gives language to why that happens. In Romans chapter 1, verse 20, he says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." So what Paul is saying here is, he's saying every single human being has had an opportunity to worship God just by what they experience. He said, don't forget that what you see was made by someone. And when you have this reflexive response of worship to the creation, what you're actually doing is worshiping the Creator. And then in this letter to the Romans that Paul writes, is he spends the majority of the rest of the letter helping them to have a better understanding of how they can have a relationship with that God who made what they see. To say, this is what it looks like to have a relationship with God through Jesus Christ and because of Jesus Christ. Because Paul and I both share a passion for the same thing. And what it is to move us beyond simple, reflexive moments of worship and to help you understand that we are invited into a deep, beautiful, life-altering relationship with God through Jesus Christ that will fill us to the deepest parts of our soul. There's something beyond simple, reflexive moments of worship. There's something bigger, more beautiful. And as we allow ourselves to be drawn in deeper and deeper and deeper into this life of worship, the more we do that, the more we understand why the ancient Israelites needed all these words for praise, why there was so much nuance, why one word didn't cut it, why you couldn't just say praise and you couldn't just say worship. You needed all of these nuanced words, because what they understood and what we're beginning to understand is that worship and praise is more than one-dimensional. It's multidimensional. And so for them, as we read the Old Testament, we see that they brought praise to God when they were thankful. They brought praise to God and worshiped God during times of celebration. They worshiped God and they brought their praise to God when they were times of mourning, when they were in sadness, when things were really, really difficult. They worshiped together corporately, and they worshiped alone as individuals. But one of the things that they understood, and that we're going to step into today, and we're going to kind of wade into, is they understood that worship at its core required submission. Because true worship always requires submission. And the Israelites understood that. But we struggle with this. We struggle with even the word submit. And the reason we struggle with it is because we struggle to surrender control. That's a very human thing, but it's also very much an American thing. Because we don't like giving up control. And in some areas of our life, we're okay with it, but in other areas, we really, really wrestle with it. But what we're going to see today is that when it comes to God, we don't really have the option to do anything else except surrender, except submit to God. It's really the only option, because submission is the act of giving in to a stronger power. Submission is the simple act of giving in to a stronger power. And there is no one stronger, there is no one greater than our God. No one. Nothing that is or was or ever will be is stronger than our God. And so submission, as an act of giving in to the stronger power, is the response that should be natural to our God. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to unpack Psalm 95. And we're going to walk through there. And I love this psalm because it kind of highlights a bunch of different types of praise, a bunch of different types of worship. And as we've said over the course of this series, there's a lot of different words, and you find a bunch of them in this passage. So we're going to walk you through kind of a progression of different types of praise and worship. And we're going to start with Psalm 95, verses 1 through 2. It says, "Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanksgiving and extol him with music and song." And so what I love about this first opening kind of part to this psalm is that it's accessible. All of these types of worship, all these types of praise are accessible to almost anyone, because these are the easy types of worship. They're the easy ones. They're incredibly important, but they're also pretty easy. And let me help you understand what I mean by that. Singing out in joy is actually a very natural human thing. We see it in children all the time. Have you ever seen a kid just singing and they don't care who hears them because they're so happy? This is singing for joy. If you've heard a person whistling as they walk down the hallway, it's really hard to whistle like that when you're not filled with joy, right? People don't just walk down the hall whistling unless there's something beautiful happening inside, unless they're content, unless they're happy. It's a natural response to sing for joy, to sing it out. It's also a natural response to shout when we've been saved. So I don't know if you've been following the news, but there's a group of young boys and their coach in Thailand who are trapped in these water-filled caves, and they've been there for a couple of weeks. And what I want you to imagine is if you were those boys trapped a couple of miles inside of a cave, thinking you would never be rescued, and then suddenly out of the water rises Thai Navy SEALs coming to rescue you, would you shout for joy? Yes. Would you shout because you're about to be saved? Absolutely, because it's a natural response to shout when we're about to be saved. If you're in the middle of a lifeboat out on sea adrift because your main ship sank, and you see an airplane, a rescue plane go by, would you jump up and down on the rescue boat shouting for salvation? Absolutely you would. It's an easy type of worship because it's a natural type of worship. What about thankfulness for what you've been given? We see that also in this, that we come before him with thanksgiving. If you're not thankful for what's been given to you, then that makes you a jerk. I'm just going to say it does. Have you ever actually had someone give you a gift and then you were like, man, this gift is lame. Like, what's wrong with you? You got me this gift. Of course you didn't. Well, I actually did once because my mom bought me a vacuum for Christmas. She thought it was going to be a fantastic gift, and I was a jerk, honestly. I was like, this is a ridiculous gift. And she was like, well, I visited your apartment, and you desperately need a vacuum. Thanksgiving, because of gifts that were given, is natural, right? And we joke about the whole jerk thing, but really what it means is that we're valuing what it is we've been given. It's natural, and it's somewhat easy. And these are important types of worship. They're necessary for us to do before God. They really are. But honestly, they only scratched the surface of what we're invited into. And I love that the whole way this psalm starts is he says, come, let's do this. It's an invitation. Come, I invite you in. If I don't want you to come along with me, I don't say that phrase. I don't say come. Let's go see. That the psalmist is saying, I'm inviting you in to an experience of God, to a worship of God. But then he invites us deeper. And he begins to explore the reality of who this God is that we're worshiping, who we're shouting for joy to, who we're singing out to, who we're thankful to. And he says, you know that feeling when you look out over the mountain vistas and you stand at the edge of the beach and you watch the sunset? Or you swim in the ocean or in Lake Michigan? Or you walk the paths in the forest and you're in awe at God's creation? Guess what? Guess who made that? And he takes us there in his psalm. And he says, for the Lord is the great God, the great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his. Why? Because he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. So those reflexive responses of praise to God, they're all rooted and centered in the one who made it in the first place. And this understanding of who it is that we worship should be a game changer for us. Because what it does is it begins to paint a picture for us of why true worship always requires submission. And the reason is this, is that submission is a natural human response when we encounter a situation or a person that causes us to realize that we are vastly overmatched. I want you to imagine that you've entered a wrestling tournament. And you thought that you entered a tournament in the 140-pound weight division, the flyweight or whatever it's called. And you come out onto the mat for your first match, and the person that walks across the mat towards you is clearly in the 300-pound division. You would not wrestle that match. You'd say, I'm good. I give up. I surrender. I'm overmatched. There's no way you would get injured. You would get hurt. So you would recognize that you're vastly overmatched, and you would either go at it valiantly. Some of you I know would do it anyway, right? Because you're that stubborn. You're like, no, I will not give up. I can take him. I can take her. And then you would get crushed. Submission is a natural human response when we encounter a situation or a person that causes us to realize that we are vastly overmatched. And when it comes to God, it's not a gap of 160 pounds. It's a gap of billions and trillions of pounds. It's a wrestling match that you can't win. You just can't. The gap between where we're at and where God is so vast that it should lead us to this realization that our worship has to move to the next level. That our worship needs to move into submission. And it's the next type of praise that the psalmist talks about in the very next verse. It's another invitation. Come. Let us bow down in worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. I love this, that multiple times in the psalm, the psalmist is inviting us, come. It's almost like the first invitation was the first step. Come, and we step into thanksgiving. We step into singing for joy. We step into these normal and natural, easy first steps of worship. And then he says, come deeper. We step again. Come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our God, our Maker. That he didn't just make the mountains. He didn't just make the oceans. He didn't just make the forests that we walk through. He made you and I. And this becomes a posture of praise that requires submission. And I promised you vocabulary, Hebrew words. There's two of them in this phrase, in this verse, that I think are really significant. And the first is Shacah, to bow down, to prostrate oneself. To bow down or prostrate. When you prostrate yourself, if you don't know what that word is, it's not prostate. That's something totally different, friends, okay? Prostrate is when you're flat on your face in front of someone. Flat on your face, full body on the ground. This is Shacah. And Barak, which is all throughout the Old Testament. I think it's like 300 times it appears in the Hebrew. And most of the time it means to bless. But the root of that word, it means knee. And so oftentimes when we see it, it's this idea that we are blessing God on bended knee. And so the first word, Shacah, is the phrase, let us bow down. And the second word, Barak, is the word kneel. Let us kneel before the Lord our God, our Maker. When we bow down before someone or something, we prostrate before them, we are either mocking them or we're surrendering to them. Surrendering to them. And it's the ultimate act of humility. It's the ultimate act of surrender to someone that we recognize we are vastly overmatched against. And it can be done physically. I can get down on my knees and I can surrender and I can say, I surrender to you. I can get down on both knees. I can lay flat on the floor and surrender and say, I'm not worthy. I recognize who you are. You are the maker of everything that is and was and shall be. And I recognize that you're the maker of me. And I recognize that I desperately need you in our life. But we would get nothing done if we stayed here all day long. If it was only a posture that is physical, we can't stay there all day long. And so what I want you to understand is that Shacah can be both an internal and an external posture of praise. An internal and an external posture of praise. But there's something beautiful and powerful that occurs when both happen. When it's a physical posture and an internal posture. A change occurs when our posture of praise is our mind, our heart, our soul, and our body. And what it does is it leads to a lifestyle shift in which we submit to God, when we surrender to God, to his will, in the ways that we think, in the ways that we act, and the things that we do, and the direction we head with our life. And what it does is it creates a lifestyle of worship, a lifestyle of praise, rather than just an experiential moment of praise. Those are important too. But there's a transition and there's a progression towards this lifestyle of abandonment towards the Lord. And in this way, when our hearts and our minds and our bodies are unified, it shows our complete dependence on God and our complete devotion to the Lord. When we are unified in our worship of God, we move beyond what I call selective submission. When we are unified in our worship of the Lord with our heart, our mind, our soul, when we actually get into these postures, it moves us beyond selective submission. Here's a definition of what selective submission looks like. It's when we submit the easy parts of our life, but withhold areas that we want to retain control over. This is selective submission. And honestly, most, if not all of us, do this all the time. Selective submission to God, where we give over certain aspects of our life and we hold back other areas. And I don't want to pretend like this is easy. I don't want to even pretend like this could happen in a day. It doesn't work that way. It's a progress over time, a progression as we surrender more and more and we become aware of, man, God, I didn't even realize I was holding on to that. Like I thought I gave you everything, but then I actually realized that when it came to my kids, nope, I haven't given them to you. When it came to my job, well, no, not really, God. When it came to my thought life, no, God, I gave you my external life, and my internal life is my area. This is where I am in control. And what happens is selective submission. And selective submission is a barrier to relationship. It's a barrier to relationship with God, and it's a barrier to relationship with people, because it prevents you from experiencing the fullness of what God is offering you. When the psalmist says, come, when he invites you in, it's not because he's inviting you into something awful. It's because he's inviting you into something that's beautiful, and he knows it because he's experienced it. Come and experience what it looks like to be completely surrendered to God. I want you to imagine what it would be like if you practiced selective submission or selective commitment to the people that you're in relationship with. Imagine what it would be like with your best friend if you were selectively committed to being their best friend. Like, I'll be your best friend some of the time when it's convenient for me, and when you will do all the things I want to do, when we do all the things that are fun to me. But when we want to do something you want to do or talk about something you want to talk about, I'm out. Selective commitment to the relationship, what would it cause? It would cause a fissure. It would cause a break in the relationship. You wouldn't have a best friend for very long. What about in your marriage? What about in the relationships you have with people? What about with your family members, your brother or your sister or your aunt and your uncle? What if you were selectively committed to them or selectively submitted to your spouse? Because what marriage is supposed to be is an act of mutual submission. We're both submitting one to the other, and we are becoming unified and united as one. There's a beauty in the relationship that happens when you do this. But if you're selectively committed, if I stood up in front of a group of people and I officiated at a wedding, I've done 2 weddings in the last like 4 weeks, and if I stood up in front and there's a man and a woman here, and in the midst of their vows, they selectively submitted, they're like, well, I commit these parts of my life to you, but these over here are the parts I'm going to keep separate for myself. I'd be like, whoa, stop the wedding. I would. I wouldn't even want to be a part of that union, because it would be a fake union. It'd be a doomed marriage. Because selective submission or selective commitment requires all of us. I mean, this idea of that you got to give it all. Selective submission will kill your relationships. It'll kill them. I knew a guy in college that had a girlfriend that we all knew he was dating. We all knew they were together, but he wouldn't call her his girlfriend. He would never publicly say, yeah, so-and-so and I are dating. We're together, because it wasn't convenient for him. Because he wanted to play the field still. He wanted to keep his options open in case there was someone better that came along, and it was awful. And all of us on the outside looking in were like, dude, that's not cool. And we were going to her and saying, really? You need to break up with him. Make it formal. Don't allow him to use you in that way, because he's only selectively committed to you when it's convenient to him. And when we see it happening in real life, we're like, oh, absolutely. No, get out of that. You see it happen in a workplace where, like, you're all in for your company, but they're clearly not committed to you, and you're like, this is not fair. It feels gross. And we would push the pause button and do a reanalysis of what's happening in our life. But the problem is it happens all the time with God, and we don't even recognize it. If that was your daughter whose boyfriend was treating her like that, you'd be like, okay, step into the mat, my brother. I'm going to take you out, right? You would tell your daughter, get rid of that guy. I would do it for mine. But we don't push the pause button with our relationship with God. We read these Psalms, and we go through Psalm 1 through 2, and we sing for joy, and we shout for salvation. But we stop reading the Psalm, and we don't ever realize that there's an invitation to something more beautiful. It's deeper, more amazing, and more satisfying than anything you could possibly imagine. Full submission to God will take our relationship with God to the next level. And it will help us to be in worship mode continually. And it's a process of stepping beyond reflexive moments of praise that are a result of God's grandeur into an intentionally responsive offering of ourself to God, to the Creator himself. And it's a move that shifts us beyond simple exclamations of praise to a deep lifestyle of worship. And it's transformative for us. It's transformative. And it's what Paul was talking about a little bit later in Romans. We go from Romans 1 when he talks about, hey, all that worship that happens in your soul when you stand on the top of the mountain or you're standing on the edge of the ocean, it's actually God you're worshiping even if you don't know it. And then he talks about what it looks like to have a relationship with that God. And he gets to Romans chapter 12 and he says this, therefore, as a result of all those things I've been talking about, all this amazing stuff that God has done for you, he says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, in view of all this incredible stuff that God has done, I urge you, brothers and sisters, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. To offer everything to God means complete submission, and it sounds terrifying. But it's not something that puts shackles on you. It's not something that causes you to be chained down. It actually becomes the most freeing thing that you've ever done in your life. Because in this posture of submission, we find our purpose. We find our purpose. We find that God knows the highest and best purpose for your life. God knows you more intimately, more beautifully than anything you could possibly imagine. And he has a plan for your life, and you find it in this posture of submission. In that place, we find that God is worthy of our trust. And we find that his will for our lives follows a better path and a better plan than anything we would have come up with on our own. But we will only find it in submission. So before you get really discouraged and you think, I am killing selective submission, but I am not good at this, I want you to remember that this is a process. It's a day by day by day process. You will not master it by next week. You will not master it in 20 years. It's an ongoing process of every day waking up and saying, Lord, today is a gift from you, and I'm grateful for it. And I want your best for my day today. I give you control over my family, my interactions with my spouse or my best friends. God, to give you control over what happens at work today. As I engage, I'm not going to selectively submit and leave out the whole middle part of my day when I go to the office. I'm actually going to be engaged with you there too. I want to have this posture of humility and surrender to you there. God, I give to you my free time in the evenings, what I do with it. I'm not going to selectively submit, but I'm just going to give it all to you. I give you permission to use my free time as well. I don't know what it is that's hard for you, but I know that there's something for all of us, some things that we'll wrestle with for the rest of our lives, but it is worth it. Because in that spot, you will find your purpose and you will find true freedom. And I want to spend the rest of our time together this morning talking with a group of individuals who have been on this journey of submission. And for them, it's resulted in something really specific. It's a total change of career. It's a change of location as well as vocation. And they are some of the missionaries that we support here at LifeChurch Livonia. So would you give it up for our friends as they come forward right now? Let's clap for them. So come into the light. I invite you. So one of the things I want to say first, I said this first service as well, is that these guys would be really uncomfortable if I said they are the picture of perfect submission. They'd be like, no, we are not, right? We are on a journey with the rest of you. And we don't want to ever have people that are sitting in the congregation look up at the stage and think that we haven't figured out. That when we say real people, real God, real life, it means us as well. That we're learning to do this on a daily basis. But what they are doing is saying yes to God and following and pursuing God's purpose and plan for their life and realizing that sometimes God likes to change our plans, right? And that when we surrender ourselves to those new plans, something happens in our soul that cannot be explained. And it's beautiful. And so what I want to first do is just allow them to introduce themselves. So tell us your name and tell us a little bit about where God's calling you to serve.
So my name is Dina Warren. I am currently and continuing to be on staff with Cru, otherwise known as Campus Crusade for Christ. So that looks like taking the gospel to Grand Valley, to college campuses, and we're just engaging with college students.
Yeah, my name is Joel Kern, and this is my wife, Mackenzie Kern. And our heart, our mission is to reach unreached people groups with the gospel, whether it's through prayer and fasting, through giving, through sending, and through growing ourselves. And in September, we're moving to Central Asia to work among the unreached. And just to give you a short snippet, what is an unreached people group? If you look in Matthew chapter 28, where Jesus gives the Great Commission, right? He says, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey." So that word nations, Jesus says go to all nations. And in English we think, oh yeah, like geographical boundary lines, the nation of America, the nation of Mexico, the nation of India. But it's not talking about geographical boundary lines. And actually in Greek, the original language, it's the word ethnos. It's where we get the English word ethnic groups. So Jesus actually gives the command, go and make disciples of all ethnic groups or people groups. And there's actually thousands of unreached people groups in the earth today, meaning they have basically little or no access to the gospel. They don't have Bibles, they don't have churches, they don't have coworkers who are believers, they don't have friends and family who know Jesus. They have no opportunity to hear who Jesus is, short of divine revelation. And so our hearts is to participate in bringing the gospel to the unreached.
I love it. Can you tell they're passionate? This is really cool. And so what I believe is that what Joel said is that the only way that they'll experience God and a relationship with God is through divine revelation or divine intervention. And what I believe is that you guys are part of the divine intervention for those people, that you are part of the divine intervention on campus at Grand Valley. There are people, college campuses can be a desperately lonely place. Desperately lonely. A lot of times people look back in their college years and they call them the lost years because they are. And so as Dina is there engaging those students, giving them hope and grace and mercy, and it's a divine intervention when you show up. And when the Kerns show up with an unreached people group that maybe have never heard about Jesus, they are the divine intervention in the lives of those individuals. And I believe God is going to do some miracles, and already is doing miracles in your lives. And so one of the things I asked them to share this morning, which is really hard to share publicly, but they're going to go for it and be vulnerable, is we're talking about submission. And so what does that look like in your life? And how has God required you to submit as you go through this process of saying yes to serving missionally?
Yeah, so for me, this kind of began like a year and a half ago, and when I was just entering and beginning and in the middle of my 5th year at Grand Valley, so finishing out my degree and that sort of thing, and just looking ahead to, do I get a job? What do I do with my life? You know, the age-old college question, or even just the life question of what do I do with my life now? What now? So yeah, the Lord really just pressed into that, and I've always had a plan. I've always said, okay, yeah, get the degree, get the job, and you'll be fine, and that's life. But then the Lord, just started to press on different things that I wasn't really expecting of what would it look like to serve in full-time ministry? What would it look like to let go of plans or let go of my plans, my future plans, and not knowing and just stepping into the unknowns, letting go of the need to please others or my parents or friends or relatives or whoever it might be, and just allow myself to step into surrender and step into just letting go of whatever my future might look like. So I'm stepping into year 2 of that, and just, again, continuing to say, I don't know what my future looks like exactly, but I know that this is where the Lord's calling me to fully submit and commit to another year of full-time ministry.
Which is really beautiful and really scary at the same time. So what about you, Mackenzie?
Yeah, so similar to Dina's story, about a year and a half ago, I've been on the same journey. Same thing, got out of college, wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Well, then I did some mission work and went to Central Asia, and it was there where I was in full surrender and said, Lord, I'm willing to do whatever you want, whatever it takes to do your will, God. And he started bringing up the unreached and give me wisdom on what that was, and then the idea of him telling me to go started coming into my head, and I was like, Lord, no, that is not what I want to do. But then I had to keep going to Jesus and saying, okay, Jesus, again, I submit my life to you, God. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to bring the gospel, to advance your kingdom, whatever that means. And then the more that I prayed and pressed into that, the more Jesus was like, yeah, I really want you to go. Like, there aren't very many people going to the unreached. There aren't very many people who are willing to lay down their lives. And that's not for everybody, but for me, I felt like that was something the Lord was asking me to do. And so through this journey, it's been really hard. Just a lot of tears, a lot of hard conversations, and just like Dina, just thinking about my future and thinking I'm having to lay down things that I thought I was going to have and do and desired and stuff. But man, I'm realizing the more that I'm laying down, the more I'm like, man, Jesus, you are so worthy of this, God. I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for your worthiness and for how good you are and how many people still need to hear the gospel and hear Jesus. So yeah, I'm going to let Joel show his share.
Yeah, and similar with me, I got saved around 15, got radically saved, like lost, jacked up, saved, still jacked up, but love Jesus. And then just through the high school years, started developing a heart for prayer and a heart for the nations, and just like realizing like, man, there's people that don't have access to the gospel. There's people groups where no one's gone to. There's people that have no chance. And, reading in scripture, you think of like Revelation 5 and Revelation chapter 7, like it says like, Jesus, like talking about Jesus, with your blood, you purchased people from every kindred, every tribe, every tongue. And in Revelation, it says that John looks out and he beholds a multitude that no one can number out of every kindred, tribe, and tongue, worshiping the Lamb. And it's like, that hasn't been fulfilled yet. There's people groups that Jesus paid his blood, like with his blood, gave the highest sacrifice in obedience to the Father. His will, right, he said, not my will, but your will be done. Paid his blood for them to come into relationship with him. And it's like, yeah, I was like, all right, man, you're worthy, Jesus. And it costs everything, like it's family, friends, job. I was a nurse, and it's like you give up security, you give up finances. People think you're crazy, you're stupid, you're irresponsible, you're a bumming off of people, and you give up what people's opinions are of you, and you give up, and you're like, all right, man, like it's all for Jesus. And you're worthy. You desire the nations. You desire the lost. And all right, we're willing to give up everything for you. So it costs. But it's in one way, it's cost everything. In another way, there is no cost because he's worthy of it.
Yeah, I love it. So good, right? I just want you to know that we support these guys and we are behind them 100%. And that for them, submitting fully to the will of God meant that it changed their whole vocation. It meant that they went through college, they graduated from college, they had a great job as a nurse already, making good money, or they never got a good job making good money because they just graduated and they're like, okay, Lord, it would be really nice if I could have like 10 years to pay off some debt before I go into vocation. But God says no. And for them, it meant a change of vocation. It made a change potentially of location. But it means different things for all of us. And so we're going to talk about that in a few more minutes here. But submitting fully to the will of God doesn't always look like this. It means a daily conversation with God where he's saying, this is what I want you to do today. And it's obedience to that today. And if they're going to live fully into what they are surrendering to, they need our prayers, right? They need our support. They need our love. They need, because nothing happens, no movement of God ever occurs without prayer at its core. Whether that be to unreached people groups or whether that be to the students on a college campus. So I think we should pray for them. What do you think? Let's do it. So would you join me with me in prayer? So Jesus, we just choose right now once again to surrender completely to you. Because you are trustworthy. And because you are worthy to receive all glory, all honor, all praise. You are worthy to receive everything we have in our lives. I thank you that Dina and Mackenzie and Joel have said yes to that. In the big and the small ways, and I pray that you would give them courage of heart, the strength of will to follow through on their commitments to you. As they reach college students, as they reach people in different ethnic groups around the globe, God, as they daily surrender to who you are, I pray that you would empower them with everything they need for the journey. You don't call us to something that you're not willing to empower us for, to equip us for. So I pray that everything they need would be given. Every relationship, every funding stream, every housing situation, every relationship, God, that you would set it up in advance. So we commit them to you, asking that you would be found trustworthy in this process. We love you. We commit them to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Give it up for them. I forgot to ask them this question, so I'll just tell you right now. we want to be able to allow you guys to engage them and how you can help them. And so they are going to be out in the lobby afterwards. And what I want to ask you, the church, to do is go and talk to them. Ask them the question, how can we support you? I know that what they would say is you can absolutely support them with prayer, because nothing that God does starts without prayer. I know that in some cases they still need funding. If you guys want to help support them, there's ways you can do that. And so please, please, please go find them in the lobby afterwards. They're going to make themselves available. Let them share a little bit more of their story for you and engage in that way. So as we wrap up and we move into our final time of just singing God's praise today, I just want to extend the invitation to you that the psalmist did. Come and see. Come and see what it looks like to go beyond reflexive worship. Come and see what it looks like to begin the process of giving your everything over to God. I don't know what it's going to look like for you, but I know that if we were to stop here today, if we were to pray to God and say, God, show me the ways that I am selectively submitting to you, I promise you that things would come to mind. I promise you that things would come to mind. And it might have to do with your work. It might have to do with your relationships. It might have to do with your thought life, because you've committed the external stuff really well, but you're not doing a good job of submitting in the internal processes. It might be in your communication, the way you treat people and the way you lead. I don't know what it is for you, but have the courage to ask the Lord today, how have I selectively submitted myself to you? Or maybe you're here today and you've never stepped into a relationship with God in the first place, and you're like, I picked a terrible Sunday to come to church. I came expecting just to kind of hear a little bit about what it meant to follow Jesus, and what I got instead was a call to surrender my everything, and I don't think I'm quite ready for that. But here's what I want you to know, is that on the other side of surrender to Jesus is freedom. Freedom from all the things that you've been holding on to, all the struggles, all the insecurities, all the sin. And sin is just simply the ways we're living that aren't in alignment with who God made us to be. There's freedom on the other side of that. So I want to pray for us. I want to invite you in as the church. Maybe it's deeper submission that God's calling you to, or maybe it's submission for the very first time. Would you go there? Come. We invite you. Let's pray. So Jesus, we make that our prayer, not just with our words, but with our body. And so God, maybe today is a day when we need to kneel. Maybe today's a day when during the worship set afterwards, we're going to feel ridiculous, but we are called to kneel, God. And if that's us, then we choose to do that today. We commit to doing that. Maybe it's an internal posture of the heart, God. Reveal to us right now the areas where we have selectively submitted our lives to you. Convict us of those areas, God, and where we have failed, where we've struggled, we just commit those to you, and we ask for your forgiveness. And if you're here this morning and you've never submitted any part of your life to God, I want to invite you to that place today to simply come to God in the quiet of your own heart and pray and say, God, I want to see what life looks like on the other side. I choose you. I choose forgiveness for all of the ways that I've messed up life. I choose freedom. I choose relationship with you. I choose to explore what it looks like to be known by God and to know God. I commit my journey to you. I commit my life to you. We pray these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.